right? In modern society, there are so many different options. You basically now, which wasn't possible before, you have to choose your profession, right? You have to choose you have to choose your partner. I guess that's also similar in Korean society, like it was in Chinese society not very long ago. Your partner would be chosen for you, basically, right? But this all changes in profilicity.
Thank you so much, Professor Hans-Georg Müller, for joining the conversation today about the profile-based society. I'm honored to have you here.
Thank you very much. I'm also honored to be on your channel.
Yeah. So for the Korean readers, they must have read this book, Korean edition. The English title is called You and Your Profile, but in Korean, the title is literally, in Korean, it is translated as a profile-based society. So it is pretty, straightforward. So there were a lot of reviews, and also there were a lot of Korean, readers who really enjoyed your insight and also new perspective taken on regarding the profile-based, society. So before we move on to the interview about your book, please, can you introduce yourself briefly and what your research field is?
Yes, I teach philosophy at the University of Macau, not too far from Korea. And I am teaching the philosophy department. And my background is actually Chinese philosophy primarily. I got my PhD degree in Germany with Chinese studies and philosophy. And then in addition to Chinese and comparative philosophy, so East-West philosophy, I also have a specialization in contemporary social theory, especially regarding the German social theorist Niklas Luhmann, who is one of the main, German social theorists. I should maybe add that in the area of Chinese philosophy, my main focus is Taoism, and especially the philosophy of Zhuangzi, but more general Taoism.
Yeah, so extending from your research field about the Chinese philosophy, what led your curiosity and what led your interest to write a book regarding the profile-based society, which seems a bit like a concept that is separate?
Yes, actually, even though it may not be kind of obvious for people who don't know me, the book is actually a kind of sequel to a previous book I wrote with my former PhD student, Paul D'Ambrosio, on Taoism, on Zhuangzi. And this book is called Genuine Pretending, on the philosophy of the Zhuangzi. And basically there we regard Taoism as a reaction. I say a little bit more about this because maybe some of the Korean viewers may be familiar with this more than Western viewers, because we regard Taoism and specifically Zhuangzi as a critique of the Confucian tradition and of the Confucian, let's say, way of shaping identity, which we regard as role-based. And this is a term we call sincerity. This means by sincere commitment to your social roles, like your family roles, right? Which are also very important in Korea, I understand, right? The roles of son or daughter or older brother and younger brother, that you form an identity by sincere commitment to these social roles. That's basically a Confucian idea. And we think that the Zhuangzi criticizes this notion of identity. That has been somehow understood by most modern and especially Western critic or Western philosophers who study Asian philosophy and who study Taoism. But in the book, in the Genuine Pretending book, we argue that they make the mistake to ascribe a notion of authenticity to Zhuangzi, because authenticity is a typical Western way of forming identity, modern Western way, I should say. It's also practiced in Asia, but it was kind of generated in modern Western philosophy, which is very much focused on the individual and on your inner self, your personal, unique, original self. And so we thought that this interpretation of Taoism, that it is somehow focused on authenticity and on individualism, isn't really true. So already in this book on Taoist philosophy, we operated with these two core concepts regarding personal identity: the concept of sincerity, which we find in Confucianism, and the concept of authenticity, which is very much a concept strongly developed in modern Western philosophy. And so we already used these terms in the Taoism book for the reasons I just explained. And then somehow the You and Your Profile book, the profile-based society, is a further development of this, because according to us, Paul D'Ambrosio and I, we also wrote this Profilicity book together. This time of authenticity is also, at least in the process of being replaced by a new era, a new time, a new form of identity building, which is profile-oriented, profile-based. So again, a short answer is already in the previous book on Taoism, the core notions are sincerity and authenticity. And then in this book, the Profile Society book, we add this third notion of profilicity.
Yeah, so before moving on to the depth conversation about the profile-based society and how it is, different from sincerity and also the authenticity, could you give a brief explanation? Yeah, you just gave an explanation about the sincerity and authenticity, but as a totality, could you give a brief definition of each three, factors about what sincerity, authenticity, and also the profilicity?
Yes. So as mentioned, sincerity basically means to build your identity by sincere commitment, sincere identification with your role. And this role is a role within a social group of peers, which can be the family, but it can also be other roles that you enact, for instance, in a professional context, whatever, in a company or in a political context or in a religious group and so forth, or even in a sports team, right? Where you sincerely commit to a certain role, a certain position, and then you identify with this. So this is sincerity as a way of identifying yourself through commitment to such a role. And then, as I said, authenticity thinks that sincerity is not really good, because it is too much a way of conformity. You conform to social expectations, right? To the social expectations of a family role, like a son or a daughter, or the expectations, whatever, to a role in a professional context in a company, as a student or as a professor. And then this is regarded as somehow inauthentic, because it's something purely external. You only conform to the expectations that come along with this social role. And so the idea is, in order to be truly yourself, you have to somehow look inwards. And you either have to discover your true self, or you have to develop, create your own original self. These are kind of two ways of becoming authentic, either somehow finding your true self or creating it. A core image that is used in literature, but also often in philosophy or even in everyday language, is that you kind of get rid of the mask rid of a mask. Your social role is now no longer considered your true identity. It's now considered just a mask that you put on and that somehow covers your true self. So you have to get rid of the role, you have to get rid of the mask, and then your original, true, individual, unique self is somehow revealed. So that's the idea of authenticity, that this is your true identity. So in order to find or develop or create your identity, you have to get rid of this mask of the role, and you have to develop and express your true self. So and in this way, you become who you are, as Nietzsche says. You form your identity, right? And this notion of authenticity, as I said, is very, very dominant in 18th, particularly 19th and 20th century Western culture, in Western literature, in Western philosophy, also in Western art. Art is also supposed to be an expression of your authenticity. So, and in education, right? Education, the Western idea of education is to help and guide young people in developing their independence and their individuality. It's very different from traditional notions of education, where education, for instance, in the Confucian context, that I think is also very strong in Korea, is education is supposed to develop your loyalty to the family and your loyalty to the group, and therefore basically strengthen dependence. Whereas the whole modern Western ideal of education is very much tied to this notion of authenticity, education is supposed to help everyone to become unique and original and independent. And now in the book, we argue that this notion of authenticity, or as we call it, the technology of creating yourself, a technology of identity, is replaced with a new technology. And this new technology is what we call profilicity, and it means that you build your identity by basically what is often called curating a profile, similar to a brand, right? It's similar to the brand in marketing, right? Where also a brand is created, and then whatever, a car or a phone, Samsung, right? It has an identity through this brand that is somehow curated. And in a similar way, we think now also personal identity is shaped by curating a specific brand, and then by having this profile, being validated, often no longer, unlike in sincerity or authenticity, necessarily by people who are directly around you, like whatever your family members, but the whole point of a profile is very often that you projected what we call to a general peer. That is to not anyone specifically, but you build up an identity that is somehow presented to a large public, but to no one specifically, right? And just as a brand, right? You want to sell the brand to as many people as possible, so you're not creating this brand identity for something specific, whatever, for your parents or for your friend or for your partner, but you project it to a general audience, which we call the general peer.
Yeah, in the book you mentioned about the metaphor of the onion. I think for the sincerity, and also first of all, can you explain how the sincerity can be considered as a metaphor, as an onion? And then if you can provide a metaphor for the authenticity and also profilicity, what would it be?
Yes. Well, this metaphor is actually by a colleague of mine. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, Henry Rosemont, who wrote a book against individualism, who is also a scholar of Confucianism. And an American, but he specialized in Chinese philosophy. So he creates this metaphor of the onion for the form of personhood, especially in Confucianism. And what this means is that the onion consists of these different layers, right? But it has no core, it has no pit. So the idea is that it has an empty center, right? And so the idea is that these different layers of the onion represent the different relationships you build up in your life, right? Maybe when you're a child, then you only have relationships to your parents or your siblings, but then you grow older and you have more relationships to whatever, your wife or your husband, and then to your children. And then you have relationships as a student to a teacher, and then maybe later on as a teacher to your students, and so forth, right? So you build up more and more relationships. And so your personality is constituted, that is Rosemont's point, entirely by these relationships, but there is no core self. If you take away the relationships, the role relationships, there's nothing left, right? So that's the idea of a person that is, and that's also what we think sincerity is, who is essentially constituted through these layers of role relationships. And I think it's also important about this metaphor that these layers are organic, that they kind of enclose one another, right? So somehow these roles, again, like in the family, from child to parent to grandparent, they're kind of organic roles, right? And then eventually you have several of these roles at the same time. You're at the same time a father, a husband, a son, and so forth, right? So, but these roles are organically related to one another. So that's why I think this onion metaphor is a good metaphor. And then Rosemont says authenticity functions like a peach because it has this very big pit, this very big core. And that's really what matters, right? And that's the idea of the individual, where really this very, which is constituted through this very strong individual core self, right? And so that's the metaphor for authenticity. I don't really have a good metaphor for profilicity. I have to work on one. But as I said, the brand is a kind of metaphor for this. It doesn't really fit to the onion peach metaphor, but it's, I think, still a good kind of example. And I mean, just think of social media profiles, right? Which is also not a metaphor, but is also where we take the word profilicity from, right? Because we have this kind of profile. We use the term profile, at least in English, for the identity you take on in social media. I'm not sure if there is a Korean word for this, or if you also use the English word.
Oh, we also use the English word. It is pronounced as propi.
Yes.
Yeah, propi. I guess we have to find another metaphor for profilicity among like other vegetables and other fruits.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So regarding this, transitions from the sincerity to authenticity, and also the profilicity. My observation is that there was a change in the medium. In the case of the sincerity, it was based on the reality, but for the case of the authenticity, since it somehow matches with the time period where there was a mass production, mass publications, like, yes, for example, like Gutenberg, like a lot of books and also publications. And then that's why people try to seek the uniqueness out of the mass. And also in the case of the profilicity, I think it matches with the development of the internet and also the technology. So,
absolutely.
So is it safe to say that the difference in the medium where the information gets transported was highly influential in the transitions of these three factors? Or do you think that these three factors precede the change in the medium?
I think there is a very important connection between the development of technology and these identity technologies, right? So I agree with this. And it's kind of very clear also, the German sociologist Niklas Luhmann talks a lot about this, what you mentioned earlier, that, new media with a printing press, right? And they allowed also for a form of privacy that didn't really exist before, that you could read a lot on your own rather than having to be before this you would go to church and then everyone would be told what's written in the book rather than reading the book itself. So the development of reading and writing and kind of individual that strongly supported kind of individualist tendencies, but then, and that's very important in the context of other social changes, right? Very important for the development of this kind of individualism, which is at the heart of authenticity, is this shift, this social shift from that the traditional aristocratic structure breaks down, and in modernity everyone has to find their own way. And traditionally you were born into a profession. Also, I'm sure in traditional Korean society, right, you would take on the job that your parents had. Somehow this was all somehow inherited. So, but then in modernity, this traditional feudal aristocratic and whatever structure that changes. You're no longer born in a specific place, in a specific family, in a specific social stratum, and thereby supplied basically already when you're born with a specific identity, right? In modern society, there are so many different options. You basically now, which wasn't possible before, you have to choose your profession, right? You have to choose you have to choose your partner. I guess that's also similar in Korean society, like it was in Chinese society not very long ago. Your partner would be chosen for you, basically, right? But this all changes in profilicity. So in authenticity, in modernity. So the technology plays a very important role, but along with the technology, there are also social changes that are taking place. And I think that's similar to the change from authenticity to profilicity. So as I mentioned, the brand is something that already emerged in commerce, in trade, in the economy before digital technology, before the internet, right? The brands are maybe like 150 years old or so, right? Before that, you would just buy shoes. Now you buy Nike or you buy whatever, before that you would have a telephone, and now you have a Samsung, right? So the branding is something that is also relatively new, but it has to do with social changes, and in this case with changes again in marketing and how you communicate, that actually come before the technological changes. And then our idea is that the way digital technology is used and the way the new technologies are used is very much kind of in the service of profile building. So profile building was already there in the form, for instance, of branding. But it allowed, so to speak, everyone to be their own brand. And so this already existing shift towards, let's say, branding and towards profile building was strongly enhanced by the new technologies. So yes, there is a strong connection between technology and shifts in technology and shifts in identity building, but it happens in the context of broader social shifts, and it's not really, we can't really say one is the cause of the other and one is the effect. They are related to one another.
Yeah, I see. So in the case of the sincerity, you mentioned that when we are born, we are given a certain role. But right now, profilicity, you have to choose your destination. You have to choose how you're going to be looked like. So do you think that these aspects of the profile-based society cause the alienation from one's, wholeness and one's humanity? Or perhaps you can say a status anxiety, that you have to choose your own destination. So is this sort of existential anxiety and also mental fatigue, is it inevitable for us?
Yes, all of these identity technologies, on the one hand, they enable us to build an identity, which is essential for both individuals as well as society to function, right? We need to have an identity, otherwise we can't exist as persons, and a society cannot function without that. So it's very essential. But at the same time, they also cause a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, as you said, right? And that's the case with all of these identity technologies. They have their upsides. They have their, allow us to achieve personhood, which is very important. But they also have their downsides, right? That they cause different forms of suffering. And of course, sincerity also causes a lot of stress, right? These traditional roles, for instance, specifically roles of the women, right? But also roles for men. They often cause a lot of stress, and that you have to sincerely commit to these roles causes stress and anxiety and suffering. And that the same is true also for authenticity, right? That you have to be different, right? That you have to be original. Because, if you actually look at it critically, you see no one is really that original and no one is really that different and not that special. But in authenticity, there's a strong competition for being more original than others. And then you have to find your true self. But what is the true self? You never really find it, right? And then you can maybe get very much frustrated. And, this idea that you have to be original, have to be unique, you have to be special, and that you have to find out who you truly are, this can also cause a lot of stress and a lot of problems, right? And then, of course, the profile curation also causes a lot of stress, right? For one is you need a lot of attention. If you don't get a lot of attention, you need a lot of validation from people who you don't know, right? So not just on, and that's something not just on social media, right? Like another example of creating a profile, of curating a profile, is that you have to curate a professional profile, a CV, a resume, right? So everything you do somehow becomes part of your personal profile. So, and that is not really, again, addressed to anyone in particular, but so there is, you always have to ask yourself, is what I'm doing, is that good enough? Is that really, will that be part of an identity that is somehow valued by society in general, right? You always have to think, is this somehow cool? Is this somehow fashionable? Is this, is the music I listen to, is the way I dress, is whatever the political opinions I have or my right? Is this something that is somehow cool? Is this something that is that something that contributes to the validity and the value of my profile? Which in previous times you wouldn't really have to think about, right? But now, I mean, there's a strong obsession with how to, position how to identify myself, how to position myself with regard to how does this contribute to my profile.
Regarding the authenticity and also the profilicity, you mentioned in the book, I realized that these two concepts are quite similar, because the part where you mentioned about the paradox of authenticity. There are 3 paradoxes of authenticity that you mentioned. First, authenticity is influenced by other people's presence. And second paradox being, for authenticity to have its value, there needs to be a recognition of others. And third paradox is that, to be authentic, to be recognized as an authentic person, you have to, be authentic, not in a totally different way, not in a very, like a surprising way, but you have to contain some kind of familiar factors. So in these aspects, I recognize that authenticity and profilicity have some kind of many commonalities. So
yes.
Is this safe to say that these two have an intertwined, similarities?
Yes, I think they're very good. I mean, all of them basically, we take this partly from the German philosopher Hegel. They're in a dialectical relation with one another. So basically, the contradictions that are inherent in one of the forms give rise to the next form. That's a basic Hegelian idea. So the contradictions or paradoxes of authenticity that you mentioned are very obvious, I guess, right? You learn to be authentic by, for instance, reading books or by watching movies. And so you learn about how to be authentic from others. So you basically, so that's in inauthentic way. You don't discover the authenticity in yourself. It's something that, again, is taught to you by society. It's basically, you're also somehow conforming to the norm, a norm that society supplies you with. And then the second aspect, as you said, right, you also need to be, your authenticity needs to be recognized by others. You can't really fully find out your authenticity by yourself. And then importantly, as you also said, somehow, if everyone is authentic and then if everyone is original, then everyone again is somehow similar in the end, right? And so, everyone tries to be authentic and different, but then somehow everyone is different in the same way. So you have, and these paradoxes become, I think, over time, they become quite obvious. So that originality is somehow copied, and like in a postmodern environment where people just, copying the originality of others, whatever that becomes very obvious. And this is the dialectical relation between authenticity and profilicity, that profilicity somehow realizes these paradoxes, and then kind of uses them no longer to be authentic, but to basically just develop a profile. So there is still kind of this element of somehow certain elements of authenticity are become somehow also central to profilicity, in the sense that you have to develop a profile that is somehow not necessarily unique, but that is somehow interesting and that somehow attracts attention. And the way of attracting attention and being interesting is what we could call somehow, the simulation, to use this concept by the French philosopher Baudrillard, of originality or the simulation of authenticity, right? That you don't find necessarily in yourself, but that you create an original profile because you think if I manage successfully to create this profile, then I will get more attention than others, and maybe my profile will have, my brand will have a higher value than those of others.
Yeah, and also like a dialectic, the comparison between the authenticity and also profilicity. And I also recognize the similarity between the sincerity and also the profilicity, because there is a mismatch between the internal desire and also the external role, external profile that you have to show to other people. So I can observe that right now in the current contemporary society, it's not a sole factor. It's not just a profile-based society, but these are all linked. For example, if you are a father who is an artist, when you go home, you have to be a good dad. And also, if you are as an artist, you have to show uniqueness. You have to show your color to other peer members. And also as a profile, you have to decorate your Instagram. You have to show a good CV or so. So I can see that there is a mixture of these three factors in the contemporary society.
Yes. Yeah. And whatever, on your profile, you show your pictures of your family, right? So, profilicity, again, referring to the German philosopher Hegel, kind of contains these previous forms, but it all uses them in the service. It uses sincerity, it uses authenticity in the service of profilicity, in the service of making your profile more valid or more interesting. So it doesn't, these previous forms do not completely disappear. They get somehow preserved, and at the same time, transformed within profilicity. And that's a dialectical relation between the different technologies.
Yeah, one of the unique aspects you mentioned about the profilicity is about the self-branding and also the brand that you mentioned. And also brand and also self-brand can be linked to the commodifying oneself, trying to maintain one's uniqueness externally, but yet trying to sell yourself. So how is this commodification of, it can be, like a nation, like Korea or Germany, or it can be a company, but also it can be self. So how is this, commodification, how can we understand linking back to the profile-based society?
That's an important point. I want to address this in relation to what you said earlier, the parallels or the similarities between sincerity and profilicity, right? In authenticity, the source of the identity is internally, right? Is your inner self. But both in sincerity and in profilicity, the validation comes from basically the external society, right? That you're a good mother or a good father has to be confirmed by your family members, right? And so forth, right? So the identity is somehow confirmed, and you build a reputation, and the role itself is something that is externally constituted. And that is very similar to the profile, where you also build up a reputation that has to be validated by the peer, by the reaction of the peer to your profile. Now, again, there's a big difference between sincerity and there are many differences between sincerity and profilicity. So that's very different. And this brings us to the question of the commodification, right? In profilicity, you're basically constantly marketing yourself, right? And the value of the profile is also very much often a commercial value in a highly capitalist society, right? It's just not, the attention you get. We have an attention economy. So just like a brand, basically, that the validation you are generating, that the validation that a profile has, is more often than not also somehow a commodified profile, right? Whatever, if you have a very bad profile, for whatever reasons, then you can't get a good job, and then your whole identity doesn't have that. So there is, because we live in a highly capitalist environment, and so you always also, the value of a profile is also not only, but also very much is a commodity. It has a monetary, a financial, an economic value attached to it.
Yeah, regarding the validation of you have to get in the market as a commodification, you mentioned that the prophylicity operates under the second order observation. So for Koreans, we are very familiar with this concept because, Koreans, we internally think that we are being very conscious of how other people feel, how other people think about ourselves.
Right.
So in Korean, although second order observation is 3 words, in Korean it can be summarized into 1 word, which is called 눈치. 눈치 is just the same meaning as a second order observation. So you can see this phenomenon in a lot of collectivism countries. So can we say that those countries where people are absorbed with these collective consciousness are more vulnerable to these systems of second order observations, like these systems and also these operations?
Yes, I have the same feeling with China, where I live, right? that there is a much smoother transition going from sincerity to prophylicity, which has to do exactly with what you just said about second order observation, right? And so Westerners, unlike probably many people in Korea or China, have a greater problem with this second order observation, but they're doing it at the same time and to the same extent, right? So again, like a second order observation, you observe not only something or someone or a thing, but you observe at the same time how it is being observed, and that's something, right? Again, like in a brand, right? If you have a shoe, then you're not just looking at the shoe, but you're also looking at the brand of the shoe. So you're not just looking at, what you see, but you're also looking at how the shoe is being seen. And again, this is basically how a brand operates. And that's something, as you say, that to an extent is also the case in sincerity. And somehow we are in East Asia, for instance, people are more, for them, that's kind of the more general way they operate. And therefore, the transition from sincerity to prophylicity, because of this second order observation tendency, is kind of smoother, right? In the West, where authenticity used to be very strong, the idea is always you should not judge, for instance, a person on the basis how others see that person, because that would be inauthentic. You should only look at the person, him or herself, and not regard and completely disregard what society thinks about this person, right? And that's also a very important difference then between authenticity and prophylicity.
So talking about, Koreans, we internally think that these second order observation is a negative thing right now, because we often get, criticize ourselves that we think too much about other people.
Right. And then you judge yourself. Then you judge yourself from the perspective of authenticity, and you find yourself inauthentic. Yes.
Yeah. So this is like a national, like a particular culture that you can see when you come to Korea, is that you are becoming too self-conscious of being inauthentic and becoming conformed to other people. So this is one, unique culture of Korea here.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yes.
Yeah. So I want to talk about one aspect that a lot of Korean readers find interested and intriguing, which is the part about the selfie obsession. So you mentioned about the part about the Fan Jiayang, who is a New Yorker journalist, criticizing on these selfie obsessions, that she explains it's the narcissistic manifestation, and also it causes the excessive appreciation of beauty, sometimes leading to plastic surgery, often in Korea and China.
Yes.
So, and then your point for this Fan Jiayang was that it's this selfie obsession, you need to look in the perspective of the profile-based society. So could you briefly explain your stance on this selfie phenomenon?
Well, again, we analyze in the book this article in the New Yorker, where perhaps this journalist, you mentioned the name, Fan, makes a similar point that you just mentioned, that many Koreans make about themselves, that they're not authentic enough. And they take these selfies and they make photos, and they only care about what others think of them, and so forth. And then she says this actually leads to this kind of uniformity, and everyone somehow becomes the same. And so it's a typical authenticity critique of selfie taking as being inauthentic. Now, the point we make in the book when writing about this article is that actually this journalist, Fan, is also just building her profile. And what she writes is just fitting into the profile that the New Yorker, the journal, and that the Americans want to build of themselves. So she is also, and then she even, she in the article, she has her Twitter handle, and she has all these profiles herself. So she makes this kind of push for authenticity while already operating in a society and through various mediums, including her profession, on the basis of profilicity. So her own persona is already highly profilic, right? She's very much, and the very article she writes against selfie taking is a form of selfie taking herself, right? A form of professional selfie taking, and presenting her is exactly in the kind of critical way that the New Yorker expects. So there is no way out, right? It's not the case that she is not that she is not profile building, that she's not selfie taking, right? So that's the point is that we are living in a society in which profilicity is inescapable. It's inescapable, and if we pretend that we are authentic, then that may enhance our profilicity, that may contribute to an interesting profile if we successfully pretend to be authentic. But from a philosophical perspective, from a theoretical perspective, and ultimately from a Taoist perspective, in order to live more, let's say, aware, have greater self-awareness, and therefore also in order to be able to better cope with profilicity, the point is not to kind of achieve some form of unrealizable authenticity, but the point is to understand that we are operating in the mode of prophilicity and that we cannot but operate in the mode of prophilicity. And again, the point is not to replace prophilicity with authenticity, which is unachievable and unattainable, but to not over-identify with prophilicity, right? To not be neither ourselves nor others. And this brings us back to the beginning. This is what I see as the core idea of Taoism, which wasn't criticizing prophilicity. They were criticizing sincerity. They were criticizing Confucianism, where people over-identify with their roles, for instance, with their family roles, and become obsessed with their family roles, strongly obsessed with their sincere commitment to their roles. And that creates a lot of pathologies. So the answer to this is not to have a family, and not to have roles, which is impossible, but and it's also not to become authentic, which is equally impossible, but to somehow develop a greater form of, number one, realization of what is going on, and therefore a form of not overly identifying with your roles. So that's a very, I guess, Taoist thing. It's a very Buddhist thing as well. The point is to see the constructed nature of any identity, and to understand that your own identity and the identity of others is just a temporary construct, and is to see the contingency of any form of identity, both of your own identity and of others. And we can see the contingency of prophilicity, and we can see the contingency of authenticity, and we can see the contingency of sincerity. And if we see this contingency, if we can see that it's just a construct that also could be otherwise, then maybe this allows us to have less stress, to have less anxiety, and to also have less kind of obsession with our identity or the identity of others.
Yeah, so I can see a lot of young people, like they're trying to quit the Instagram or Facebook because, oh, I don't like these inauthentic posts. Oh, I don't like people just posting their, like highlights of their life. But as you said, it's pretty impossible to completely opt out of this prophilicity, rather to accept it and also to move on. Yeah.
Yes.
I can see that. Yeah, I understand.
To see through it and to see to critically, to live in it with a critical distance. That's live with it with a critical and maybe even creative distance, and with an understanding. And I think that is somewhat similar. That's why where's the Taoist and the Buddhist element in it, how you develop a kind of an understanding of this emptiness that is very much a central element of all these identities.
Yeah. So my last question for today returns back to you. So while I was reading this book, I was curious about you. So if you have 3 options that you can choose, following options, which one would you choose? First option is a 12th century, where you work as a farmer, and where you're the son of the farmer, and where there is a sincerity. And second option is the 19th century Paris, where you can write with like authors like Albert Camus, and also like Sartre, and also you trying to devote yourself to find your own voice and uniqueness. Or the last option is living in Macau in 2022 in profile-based society. So which option would you choose if you're you?
Oh, definitely the authenticity option, because that's the culture I grew up with, and that's like most of my people, my generation, but even younger generation, we still have a very strong preference for this authenticity culture, and so that's what I grew up in, and what at the same time, yeah, as I said, like, I mean, I'm also happy to happy here in Macau. I have no problem with that either.
But not as a son of a farmer, right? Not.
Nah, I mean, everyone has that as well. But this is what I also have, of course, parents and grandparents. Now they're deceased, but I grew up in the countryside, in very rural Germany, and still what, at least in part, was still a sincerity setting. So that's also something I can relate to. So all of the three forms are acceptable for me. All of them are acceptable. But then the closest to me is the authenticity one, and the second closest is the profilicity, and the farthest away is the sincerity.
Yeah. So thank you so much for the interview today. Koreans reader gained a lot of insights from your book and also from this conversation. So thanks again for joining this conversation, Professor Hans-Georg Müller.
Thank you very much. I hope the recording will be okay.